So this morning, I want to talk a little bit about something that's a simple idea that we're all familiar with, but it might be something that we don't think too often about what it really means, and that is worship. We're all familiar with the idea of worship, but what does it really mean? A few years back, I was living in Florida, and I had a coworker who was a part of a different faith, and he was very involved in his church. And there was one day that he and I were having some conversations about our faith backgrounds and talking about our churches with each other. And one of the questions that he asked me was, well, at your church, do you guys have worship? And I thought, that's kind of a silly question. Of course we have worship. We go to church every Sunday. We worship. But in his church, worship was something specific. Worship wasn't the service itself on Sunday. That at his church, just like ours, he had a pastor who would come up and read from the Word and preach a sermon, but they had worship as a part of their service where they would play music and they would sing along to it and they'd put their hands up in the air. And so it was a special part of their service that they called worship. And that was what worship was for them. And so that sort of made me think, what does it really mean to worship? Because I know that what we do here we call worship, but what is it really to worship something or to worship the Lord? Well, the American Heritage Dictionary defines worship, and it gives sort of two different elements to it that are connected. The first thing it says is that worship is the reverent love and devotion that's accorded to a God. So it's the love and devotion that we have for God. That is worship. But then it also adds that it can be the ceremonies, prayers, or other religious forms by which this love is expressed. So worship is our love and our devotion to the Lord, but it's also the things that we do that express that. And so what we do here every Sunday is we come in here and we have a worship service. That what we do, the things that we do in this room are to help us express our love and our devotion to the Lord. And so one of the questions that I want to ask to everyone is, do we think there are things that we have to have in order for something to be worship? Are there certain elements that you have to have this, otherwise it doesn't count? It's not worship. And are there certain things that we might look at and say, we absolutely cannot do this, otherwise that would make it so it's not worship anymore? Let me give one example. This morning, you might notice that I am wearing these special clothes. I'm wearing this robe. And in the new church, all of our ministers are given these robes. And there are some churches where ministers wear this every Sunday. And maybe even more than that, anytime they preach. If they have a church school, sometimes even when the kids come down to have chapel, the minister will put on these robes because this is what they do to lead worship. But here at Oak Arbor and in a lot of other congregations too, the ministers don't always wear these robes. In fact, most of the time, I don't preach wearing these. I wear these usually when there's something special, like this morning because we're having Holy Supper, or if I'm performing a baptism or a wedding. Then I'll wear these robes. But for the most part, I'm up here and I'm wearing a shirt and a tie. But what if I took that even a step further? What if I showed up one Sunday to lead in our Sunday service here and I was wearing shorts and a t-shirt and flip-flops? We might look at that and say, oh my goodness, there's no way we could have worship if our minister was dressed like that. That would be totally inappropriate. But is that what makes something worship or not? Or what about the music that we sing? We have these blue liturgies that have these songs in them, and that's what we use. We put the numbers up and we sing those songs. And sometimes the songs are played on the organ, and sometimes they're played on the piano. But is one of those more worshipful than the other? Or what if we didn't have either of those? What if we had no accompaniment and we just sang with our voices? Or what if we sang music that wasn't even in our liturgy? Are these things that would make it more worship or less worship, or is that something different? Well, I hope that some of these examples that I've given here have sort of made some of us squirm in our seat a little bit in terms of thinking of what makes us comfortable around worship and what we like to think of as the worship that we like to do. But I want us to think about what really makes something worship. And so I want to share a story from the Lord's Word this morning. And this story involves King David. And while it doesn't use the word worship, in this story, he is celebrating and he is worshiping the Lord. And he does it in a way that his wife, Michal, really does not like. So I want us to listen to this story and pay attention to how David is worshiping the Lord in this story. This is from the second book of Samuel, chapter 6. And it was told King David, "The Lord has blessed the household of Obed-Edom and all that belongs to him because of the ark of God." So David went and brought up the ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom to the city of David with rejoicing. And when those who bore the ark of the Lord had gone 6 steps, he sacrificed an ox and a fattened animal. And David danced before the Lord with all his might. And David was wearing a linen ephod. So David and all the house of Israel brought up the ark of the Lord with shouting and with the sound of the horn. So let me pause here for a second. So at this point, they're taking the Ark of the Covenant, which is sort of the most sacred thing the children of Israel had, and this thing has sort of been on a journey. And it's finally coming back to Jerusalem. And David is so excited that the ark is finally coming back to Jerusalem that he breaks out in dance. And he's dancing in front of the ark. And it says he's wearing a linen ephod. And what that is basically, it's a really plain kind of robe. It's kind of like if we were wearing just like an undershirt. It's not anything fancy. It's kind of not something that you would really wear out in public. And David was the king. He's the king of Israel, and he's wearing this linen ephod, and he's dancing, and they're shouting, and they're blowing these horns as they bring the ark into Jerusalem. So let's continue reading, and let's see how his wife, Michal, reacts when she sees the way that he's acting. As the ark of the Lord came into the city of David, Michal, the daughter of Saul, looked out of the window and saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord, and she despised him in her heart. And they brought in the ark of the Lord and set it in its place inside the tent that David had pitched for it. And David offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before the Lord. And David returned to bless his household. But Michal, the daughter of Saul, came out to meet David and said, "How the king of Israel honored himself today, uncovering himself today before the eyes of his servants and their female servants, as one of the vulgar fellows shamelessly uncovers himself." And David said to Michal, "It was before the Lord, who chose me above your father and above all his house, to appoint me as prince over Israel, the people of the Lord, and I will celebrate before the Lord." So when Michal saw David acting this way, when she saw him dancing and wearing this plain robe and shouting and blowing these horns, she didn't like it. And she went to him and she said, "This was so totally inappropriate. You're the king. You're not supposed to act like this. You're not supposed to dance in front of the ark and shout and do all of these things. What is wrong with you? You're doing it wrong." But David said to her, "Look at all of the amazing things that the Lord has done for me. Look at everything the Lord has provided me in my life." And he doubled down and he said, "I am going to celebrate the Lord." The things that David was doing in this story might make us feel kind of uncomfortable. If we saw someone worshiping by dancing and shouting and doing all of this stuff, we might look at them and think, "Wow, that is not how I worship. That is not the way it's supposed to be done." But he wasn't doing it purposefully. He wasn't thinking, all right, how should I worship the Lord today? I think I'm going to do it this way. It just happened. It was just a natural expression of the way that he was feeling, and it came out that way in dance and with shouting and all of this stuff. So was he wrong to celebrate the Lord that way? What was it? What is it that really makes worship genuine? What is it that makes it true, real, genuine worship? For that, I want to turn to the teachings of the new church and share a passage from the work Apocalypse Explained, number 325. And it says, "Worship does not consist in prayers and in external devotion, but in a life of charity. Prayers are only its externals, for they proceed from the person through their mouth. Consequently, a person's prayers are such as they themselves are in respect to life. It does not matter that a person carries themselves with humility, that they kneel and sigh when they pray, for these are externals, and unless externals proceed from internals, they are only gestures and sounds without life. In each thing a person utters, there is an affection, and every person, spirit, and angel is their own affection, for their affection is their life. It is the affection itself that speaks, and not the person without it. Therefore, such as the affection is, such is the praying. Spiritual affection is what is called charity towards the neighbor. To be in that affection is true worship. Praying is what precedes. From this, it can be seen that the essential of worship is the life of charity, and that its instrumental is gesture and praying, or that the primary of worship is a life of charity, and its secondary is praying. So what this passage is saying is that true worship, really worshiping the Lord, is just living a life of charity. When we live a good life, when we genuinely go out and love other people and do good to other people, that is worshiping the Lord. And the external things that we do for worship, the things that we do in this room on Sunday, the goal of those is that isn't worship in and of itself. This isn't worship because there's a minister standing in front of you. It's not worship because we have the word on an altar and because we sing these songs. What makes this worship is what we do when we walk out of these doors and go out into our lives. And if our worship is good, if the external things that we do are working, then when we come here and we worship in this way, we will feel inspired to go out and live a good life. Because that's what it's all about. Worship is about life. And so the externals that we do, the kind of music that we sing, whether our minister wears robes or not, what our building looks like, all of these things are here, not because that's what makes this worship, but because hopefully everything that we do comes together to inspire each one of us every week to want to go out and live according to what the Lord teaches us. And when we do that, and we live the life of charity, and we treat other people well, and we love them, then that is true worship. Amen. Let's rise and sing together our next hymn, which is number 913, I Am the Bread of Life. Afterwards,